In her first 100 days in office, Governor Mikie Sherrill putting New Jersey at the center of a battle with ICE, signing an executive order this week trying to keep agents from running operations on state property. Homeland Security slamming Governor Sherrill, saying that order is, quote, legally illiterate. Governor Sherrill also launching an online portal where people can upload videos of ICE agents in New Jersey communities.
This portal will help us to hold them accountable, to track their actions, collect that information, and use it to spot patterns that can inform our response as a state, including in court.
But some officials are pushing back against Governor Sherrill's announcement. Republican South Jersey Congressman Jeff Van Drew calling this a mistake. Former U.S. Attorney Alina Habba also weighing in, saying this, quote, someone should brief Governor Sherrill on the supremacy clause before she tries to cosplay as a constitutional scholar. There's a whole lot of animus and emotion on both sides of this debate, so we want to take a step back and look at the law here. And joining me now to do just that is Rocco Ciparone, former federal prosecutor in the District of New Jersey. Rocco, it's good to see you as always.
Great to be with you again, Eric.
Listen, you just heard some of the rhetoric from both sides here. It's been scathing. The governor has spoken at length about protecting people's constitutional rights, with DHS and the DOJ citing the supremacy clause in the Constitution. So before we go any farther, what exactly is a supremacy clause? What does it allow for?
So the supremacy clause allows for the federal government to come into a state and execute its responsibilities and obligations within the parameters of the other provisions of the Constitution. And there's a competing balance here between that supremacy clause and the 10th Amendment and what has evolved from Supreme Court case law into what's referred to as the anti-commandeering doctrine. So there are limits to the supremacy clause functions of the federal government as well.
As with most laws, is this up for interpretation here?
It is up for interpretation, right? But I think the governor's executive order was pretty carefully crafted from a legal perspective. It precludes ICE from going on to private property that is operated by the state, but not public property. And that's the key distinction from the perspective of the supremacy clause and the anti-commandeering doctrine of the 10th Amendment. So, for example, the feds can come onto public roadways, parks, any areas that the general public has access to the same extent that the general public can. Things they can't do under this executive order, for example, is go into a state prison, a state office building that is limited to employees being present, or other areas where you basically either need some security clearance or some form of registration before you can get in.
The state's acting attorney general urged people not to interfere with law enforcement. We played that just a few moments ago. Do the state's actions and the governor's executive orders qualify in any way as impeding or undermining law enforcement?
Look, I'm sure at some point that's going to be contended by the federal government and maybe even litigated. But the strict language of the executive order does not do that. In fact, it says the express opposite, that there should be no interference with federal law enforcement, because that's where the problem comes in. If there is interference, then it is no longer acting within its rights under the 10th Amendment, because you cannot interfere with legitimate law enforcement activities that are being carried out legitimately by the federal government if they're in the right place at the right time.
Is there that danger? Can that argument, I know you said that this will potentially be something that is argued. Do you feel as though that is a legitimate argument right now, especially as it pertains to people, this ICE portal, people uploading videos of ICE activity?
Well, again, they have a First Amendment right to do that as long as they don't interfere. It's no different than, for example, any other private citizen videotaping law enforcement activity on the street, whether it's a legitimate arrest, an unlawful beating of someone. That can happen where you cross the line and impede the investigation somehow or impede the law enforcement activity is where the problem comes in. So if you limit yourself to the four corners of that executive order, in and of itself, it's not a problem. But we all know that sometimes people get overzealous and might cross that line, and that's where the balance will have to take place on a situation by situation basis.
Something else that's making headlines right now in the state, actually across the nation, has to do with masking of law enforcement. There's a bill going through the state legislature right now forcing law enforcement, not just ICE, but all law enforcement to unmask. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. I mean, as you know, I was a federal prosecutor in my past existence and have been a criminal defense lawyer for quite some time. And what I've learned over the course of that is there are legitimate reasons why some law enforcement officers might need to mask their identity. One, it could cut down on interference later. Two, they can be otherwise sometimes acting in an undercover capacity, pulled into a more high-profile public capacity, but don't want to jeopardize their ability to act undercover or their safety later. The other problematic thing is there is doxing that occurs, and I think as human beings, law enforcement agents are entitled to be protected from that, or certainly their families as well. So there's a tension and a push-pull there. I can see legitimate reasons for the public wanting agents unmasked, but I see the agency's position in not wanting to be unmasked. And I think that's going to have to play out again because there can be serious consequences to agents if they're acting lawfully, not to have their identities exposed. And by the way, these agents typically will have to do reports where their identities are documented when they're involved in an operation. And if there's litigation later, people can get access to that in the litigation with certain limitations. So there's records of that anyway, despite the masking.
All right, former federal prosecutor Rocco Ciperon. Rocco, it's always great to have you on the show, and thank you so much for sharing your insight.
Always happy to be here, Eric. Thank you very much.
All right, be well.